Aloha, planet citizens. Welcome to today's episode of Eco Ventures. We're here in West Palm Beach. I'm currently in the airport and I'm looking at the Midwest temperature plunge that's going on. So it was minus 23 degrees in Chicago, minus 14 degrees in Nebraska, and minus 28 degrees in St. Paul, Minnesota. Today's episode, there's a lot of interesting places that we've gone since last episode. So we begin in Arizona at the Biosphere 2. Biosphere 1 is planet Earth, and Biosphere 2 was set up back in the 90s. It was built in 4 years, an amazing feat for what it is. Within the biosphere, there are all kinds of different biomes. There's savannas, there's an ocean, there is a rainforest. They have also, desert and a marsh. So we're going to be in the middle of the desert in Arizona, and we will find ourselves in the largest earth science experiment in the world. Back in the 90s, there were a group of scientists who lived in the biosphere. They were completely sealed in, and they were there to measure data. They were from Columbia University, and they were looking at the effects of changing environment. For example, they put a lot of CO2 in the air to see how the rainforest, to see how the ocean would respond. Currently, in the ocean section, they're working, it's the University of Arizona, who now owns the biosphere, and they continue to do research. They're working closely with a scientist in Hawaii who has found large strong corals or healthy corals that we will hear how they have sort of breeded them together, not messing with their DNA, sort of like you would do if you were going to breed dogs. And they are going to be testing how they thrive in the high ocean acidification and high algae environment that is going on. So we will hear from the educational outreach director at the Biosphere 2. Very exciting. We then move on to Palm Beach, Florida. And in West Palm Beach, I was able to attend a Tony Robbins business mastery. And it was very interesting because as the Arctic weather is going on in Chicago, I actually left the seminar. So sorry, Tony Robbins, and you've got a wonderful program. I physically couldn't take it. I lost my voice after 2 days, not necessarily there's a lot of shouting that goes on, but it was the environment. For me, personally, it was a hostile environment because it was 48 degrees, and we were in there for 12 hours a day. So if you ever go to a business mastery, make sure that you really bundle up. Bring your own food, and just be prepared for the cold. So I do want to just say to those of you out there listening, Tony Robbins likes his area cold. I'll be talking more about different experiences because we are in a world of experience marketing, and there's an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal today, but I don't think we're going to have time in this show. The next thing we're going to talk about, we're always highlighting bright spots, and so in Arizona, on our way to Palm Beach, I was fortunate to meet someone from Walter Productions, and they were able to share a little bit about the indigenous wisdom that influenced the structure of Arizona's aqueducts. When the Sky Harbor Airport was being built, they found remnants of indigenous people who had created all of the aqueducts that are still used today to keep water flowing in Arizona. And it's surrounded by other states who experience droughts, but for for Arizona to be in the middle of the desert, and with over 1 million people, many people, they've never experienced a drought. So really phenomenal work. And again, we're always sort of talking about how everything's connected, and sometimes it's very important to look to the past to understand our future. And there's a perfect example of how in our modern times we've discovered just recently the impact of Indigenous people on current cityscapes and urban planning. Then, to follow up with the Biosphere, there's a wonderful article in Real Leaders 100. They're focusing on top impact companies. And there's a wonderful article about Robbie Nash, and he's been dealing with advocating for reducing plastics. He's a very well-known waterman and windsurfer. In fact, he's the greatest windsurfer of all time. So we'll hear a little bit about that at the end. Next episode, next week, we'll find ourselves in San Diego. And there's a really great surf art exhibit that we're going to visit. The proceeds from that will be going to Rob Machado's foundation. Rob Machado, again, is one of those surfers from the Momentum generation. We were referring to it a couple of episodes ago. The Momentum generation is on HBO, and it highlights the surfers who really shifted surfing to a whole new level. And as our economies change and as our cities change, and we're all dealing with shifts, I think it's very important that we can be inspired by the people who are changing their industries, as you may be impacting and changing yours. Thanks for tuning in today. My voice is pretty shot, but if I hadn't dropped out, I think I might be one of the few Tony Robbins dropouts. Not necessarily that it's a bad program, not saying that. What I'm saying is I couldn't take the environment. So stay warm wherever you are. Stay tuned, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Biosphere 2. Aloha.
Lately, so we have an increasing trend with carbon dioxide as well as a warmer climate on planet Earth. So our ocean's chemical composition has been changing. And that was actually heavily predicted how our oceans today look by Columbia University. So Biosphere 2, when it was no longer for its initial closed sealed mission purpose, was owned by Columbia University. And they did research on carbon dioxide. They wanted to see what would happen to our oceans as well as the rainforest. So they pumped a bunch of carbon dioxide into here, and surprise, a lot of things died in there. And their research was very groundbreaking at the time, and it supported ocean acidification. So they predicted kind of what our oceans look like today. And that ocean acidification occurs when you have carbon dioxide reacting with water, H2O. You get something called carbonic acid. That carbonic acid decreases the pH, making it a more acidic environment. And as well as the oceans that are heating up because of the increased temperature. Some animals are okay. They can change their migration patterns, or they can kind of swim away from the different areas that's affecting them. But others are not so lucky. They're kind of stuck at where they are. And also it's happening at a kind of a rapid rate. So some of these animals, even the ones that can kind of swim away, can't adapt as quickly as the ocean is changing. So that is one of the many issues our ocean is facing. And that brings me to this guy over here, our coral. So we used to have a very beautiful, thriving coral community here at Biosphere 2, in fact, until Columbia University did their research. And then it died, go figure. So what happens to our coral? And I should just note, in the last 30 years, we have lost half of all our coral reef species. So we are seeing that on planet Earth, right? And they can't swim away or get away because they're stuck there. And corals are indeed animals. They're also part mineral and part plant. They're a very interesting organism. And they're a very, very important ecosystem, as they are considered the rainforest of the ocean in regards to how much biodiversity they actually house. So 25% of all of the ocean marine life at some point in their lifetime is affected or around a coral reef system. So because of that, when we've lost half of our systems, we want to make sure we're going to have more more of that coral in the future with the changing ocean, because there's a good chance it's going to get worse before it gets better. So that is some of the research we're doing here, and we have to do a little bit of experimental research because we need a solution and we need it fast. But before I get a little bit more into that, because the current coral research is what we're doing here, I just want to talk a little bit about my coral friend here. So, of course, this is the skeleton I have here. I'm not going to pass around if anyone wants to see and get a closer look. No? That's fine. I don't like touching things either. So how this works, of course, this is like the skeleton, and this is what it makes for itself so it can be protected. If you guys can see all the little holes in there, they're very tiny. Now that is where the animal part of coral lives. It looks like an upside-down jellyfish, and it's called a polyp. So they will actually live in there, and they'll extend their little tentacles to filter feed is how that works. And I did mention they are part plant. Now I have a handy-dandy diagram for a little bit better view of it, but there are actually plant cells that live inside the polyps. It's a symbiotic relationship that they both benefit from. The plant gets protection, the coral gets some energy from it.
Is that the zoanthale?
It is a zooxanthale.
Zoanthale. How do you say it? I've been saying zoanthale.
I've been saying zooxanthale. I've heard.
Oh, zooxanthale. So zooxanthale and zoanthale is like tomato.
Yeah, from my understanding. Yeah, so it is indeed the zooxanthale. And so this is the mineral part, of course. That's that. We have the animal in there, the polyp, like I said, that upside-down jellyfish. And if you can see, it's zoomed in here, and you can see the little cells in there, and it's pointing out that there are plant cells in there, and they are called the zooxanthale. They're little algae cells that live inside there. And that's why coral needs to be closer to the surface, because they need the sunlight, like all plants do, to photosynthesize. So our coral gets energy from that, as well as it filter feeds. Now it's a pretty great little situation they got set up there. However, if you guys have ever heard of the term coral bleaching, that is a stressor response. And coral, ocean acidification is not great, but really it's the increase in temperature that's doing the most damage right now to our coral. And what happens when coral gets stressed is the first thing it does is it gets rid of the zooxanthale. It expels that algae. I don't really know why, because it's much harder for it to live. And actually, it's the algae that gives our coral its color. So when it gets rid of that algae, that's why it turns white, and that's why it's referred to as coral bleaching. Now, a bleached coral is not necessarily dead. It can still come back. However, it's very difficult. Now, those polyps get very stressed having to 100% filter feed, and eventually, if it doesn't get better, then they do indeed die, and then you're ended up with just the mineral part, which is the skeleton. But that's kind of the basis of our coral.
Can I share something?
Oh, thanks.
Okay, so I'm from Hawaii. And on my show, I often tell people there's 20,000 people a week who come into Waikiki, and they all wear sunblock. But wherever you live, if you wear sunblock, they found out that the zoanthale, yeah, that stuff, if you use zinc-based sunblock, it doesn't harm them. But if you use the ones that a lot of us do use, it clogs them. And so it's like a double factor. So if you just use zinc-based sunblock, yeah.
Zinc-based sunblock is the way to go. I have been hearing about, and I believe Hawaii even banned.
Yeah, we made it illegal, but ironically, there's still all the other ones that haven't been sold on the shelf. So apparently, the messages use what is there and then switch over. I don't know, but but zinc-based is awesome.
Yeah, zinc-based. So there's lots of different things you can do to help the corals, as well as many of the oceans outside of being research or anything of that nature. So thank you for that ad. Yeah. There's a lot of things that affect it, and there's a lot of things that we can do to help it. So those little corals, as I was mentioning, are very sensitive to many different things, heat stressors being the one that we've been looking into currently. So the experimentation that we've been doing here is we've been trying to create a super coral, so to say. So Columbia University killed the coral in here, and now we're trying to revive it. So how this works is of course, in the name of science, how this works is we partnered with a lot of different universities, and they, of course, researchers have taken note. Now, we've lost half of all the coral species, but we still have half, right? We like to be optimistic here. So they have been kind of breeding together the best of the best, right? It's kind of like only the fittest survives. And they're assisting in evolution, right? It's not genetically modified. They're not going into on a DNA cellular level. They're just kind of like dog breeding. This one's strong, let's breed them, and then their off-brand should be stronger. And they've been doing that with heat stressors. So they'll stress them out in a heat environment. The ones that survive, they breed them together. So they've been doing this quite a bit. They have some super coral, for lack of a better term. And the hope is that they can put that into the ocean so that if it gets worse before it gets better, we're not going to wipe out all of the coral system, and it's not going to become an extinct species. So that's what they're doing, and they have some super coral, but of course you cannot create a new species and throw it into the ocean and, just say you did the job, right? That's not going to work. So we are the world's largest ocean research tank. We're not like an aquarium or anything of that manner. This is a self-sustaining, for the most part. We have that wave machine, of course, some technology kind of aiding in what we don't have that on Biosphere 1 here and Biosphere 2. But they're going to test out the super coral here to see, is it going to be good? How does it react with other corals, other marine life, other species? And would it actually be able to help us in the long run in our actual oceans? So that is what we're doing here. But before we can do that, we have a lot of work to do. So when we kind of killed our ocean system, so to say, with that experimentation, there is a few marine life in there if you're interested. For our fish species, we have a yellow tang, a naso tang, a sergeant major fish, and a doctor fish. So, and they were from the initial closure. They're just very hardy fish. I don't know how they survive. Those are the only fish we have in here. Much of the sea life was killed off. And because of that, we have an overgrowth of algae. That's the sign of kind of a desert ocean, if you will. And that algae sucks a lot of the oxygen out of the water. So it makes it harder for things to live in there. Like our coral. So we have an algae cleanup process that we have to do. But as I mentioned, we're not an aquarium. We cannot put chemicals into our system, nor can we remove all the algae at once because it would shock the system. So we have some helpful invertebrate friends. We have a lot of hermit crabs here. This is, of course, a fake one, but let me see. I know they're around here. They're little tiny. Interesting is that our pH here is about 8.3, so it's pretty neutral, a little bit more on the basic side. The pH in the Sea of Cortez is 8.1, so slightly more acidic. So you can already see a difference between the Biosphere 1 ocean and even just our little kind of more self-contained ocean we have in here, right? It's not getting as much carbon dioxide as the ocean is in the Sea of Cortez. So just kind of an interesting point.
So Biosphere 1 is our Earth. Okay, thanks.
I'm sure you're going to see that. They'll mention that later, but it is. That is our Earth, and that's what Biosphere 2 is based off of. So, our ocean, of course, that's one of the things we got going on. There's a lot of things that's happening to our ocean that aren't that great. I'm sure you've also heard of the garbage patch we have in our ocean. A lot of garbage in there, and the number one baddie is that plastic. A lot of plastic in there, not a great thing. And sad fact is that about 8 million pounds of plastic waste ends up in our ocean every year. And there are three main different types of plastic that we see in there. We've got the macro, which is pretty large, things like cups, straws. These guys are awful. Please don't use them if you can help it. And then mesoplastic is stuff that gets broken down, so maybe like half, just this part up here would be the mesoplastic. And another really bad guy we got here is that microplastics. I'm sure you guys have heard of before. These guys can be found in things like toothpaste, body wash, face wash, things of that nature. And when they're dissolved in water, they look a lot like plankton. So a lot of the animals in the ocean eat them. 90% of all sea life birds have been found to have plastic in their stomachs. And 30% of the fish that we've gotten on the market have been found to have traces of plastic in them. So it's not a great sign, but I bring it up because this is not to shame anyone. I mean, that's not what it's about here. It's just about knowing the impact that you have, because sometimes it's hard to think, I'm just one person, what can I do? But I want to be optimistic. There's always hope, right? So there's a lot of things you can be aware of, like your sunscreen, right? Your sunscreen for the cold if you take a beach vacation, or the kind of face washes or toothpaste that you buy. There's even an app on your phone you can get called Ban the Microplastics. Sometimes you might see brands that say no microplastics in it, but there is a loop around the law where they can say that and still even include microplastics. So with this app, you can scan kind of like the barcode, and it will tell you. Sometimes you have to kind of add in, it's kind of a work in process, but it's something, right? So I just bring it up because there's lots of things that you can do to help our ocean, even if you don't live by one, but you want to feel like you're part of the cause. So there is hope. We are trying to instill hope right now. We're trying to find that super cool to help our ocean, and so we're going to have a better ocean in the future. So that's the plan, and that's what we got going on here at Biosphere too. So
That's so great.
yeah, right? You got to be optimistic.
Wait.
Because of the travel, I am doing our interviews. I don't have people to interview in the airport. It was too much transition moving from Honolulu through Arizona and Texas, getting to Florida and now back. So thank you, EcoVentures listeners and new listeners. Generally, we have live people who we're talking to in person, but I'm having to make a 20-minute transition. So I'm looking at real leaders who inspire the future. It's a magazine, and they're highlighting the 100 top impact companies. And as mentioned earlier, I was talking about Robbie Nash and how he is the world's one of the widely acknowledged as the greatest windsurfer of all time. And this article is about the war against oceans turning into plastic soup. That's the title of it. I highly recommend getting this magazine. It's a very, very good magazine. But in the statistic that's very interesting here, we've just listened to the educational outreach director at Biosphere 2 in Arizona, and she was talking about plastics and the issue with straws. I love straws. You know, we all love straws, but in previous episodes, we've highlighted people who are moving to straws that are made out of sugar and biodegrade, straws that are made out of a biodegradable type of paper. But she recognized and illustrated during the presentation at the Biosphere that any kind of plastic is getting into it. So this is a fact that I want to share from this article that I think will help make it clearer to people what is happening. So in October of 2018, scientists discovered just how far plastic had infiltrated our ecosystem when they discovered microplastics in human feces from individuals in Finland, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Poland, Russia, the UK, and Austria. Every stool sample tested positive for up to 9 different plastic types with an average of 20 particles of plastic per 10 grams of stool. You know, okay, you might be saying, Cindie, why are you talking about people's feces, poop? But it's important. What is showing up in our ocean creatures? They eat it. It's in them. It's in their systems. Remember, everything's connected. So if everything's connected and this is in their environment, then it's in our environment. We're all sharing the same environment. If you were to take an apple and you look at the apple and just pretend that that apple symbolizes the world, the biosphere is the part that we live in, right? That's everything from, you know, the land that we're on, the oceans that we're in, up to the top of our stratosphere, where we can then no longer have oxygen. So that space is as large as the skin of the apple. Okay, so our biosphere is as large as the skin of the apple. It's very, very thin. There's a woman who is a sailor. She's I don't know if I'm saying her proper title, but she has sailed around the world, and she was very curious about this. And so she started testing herself because she was seeing all kinds of growths on fish, and she was testing the fish. Therefore, if there's anything that you would like to do to reduce your use of plastic, perhaps you just might think about, hey, you can go into Starbucks with your own cup and they will let you fill it tremendously larger. Like, you can get large fills of coffee if you just bring your own cup. So you could save money in that you're not having to spend extra, or they're not having to spend extra on the 4 pieces of rubbish you get when you buy a coffee. And that's why a lot of restaurants are beginning to move to biodegradable plastics, biodegradable packaging for to-goes. I met a very interesting person from New Zealand, and he has put me in touch with a man that will be in a live interview next episode also. And he is the first person in New Zealand who uses completely biodegradable products, and he's bringing them into all the restaurants. That is a wonderful thing. And so just think about it. If you can take a moment and just use something, let's say you've got your thermos or you've got your large cup, if you can carry your own device for drinking beverages, you will be making an impact today every time you use that by consuming less and less plastic, because when it goes into the ocean, it ends up in us. So thank you for listening to that, and thank you for hanging into this highly eccentric episode of Eco Ventures. But thank you for tuning in, and thank you for hanging on. Find us on Instagram at ecoventures.radio. We're on every other Thursday. That's once a fortnight at 2 o'clock California time. Thank you so much for what you do in your homes, in your neighborhoods, and to be kind to each other, to be kind to yourself, and to be kind to the planet. Let's have fun. Let's be smart and have fun. Ahui ho. In previous episodes, we've talked about VUCA times. That is from Jonathan F.P. Rose's book, The Well-Tempered City. And VUCA means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so right as we're thinking about these extreme cold temperatures, and I'd like to share with you this article from the Wall Street Journal that explains the polar vortex. And this is how it goes. The polar vortex born from burst of heat. And so as we see extremes in our environment with heat, it is also causing extremes in cold. So everybody's talking about global warming, but those extremes, for every up, there's a down. That's what's happening. It's pulling the cold down. So this is a great explanation. The polar vortex is bringing frigid temperatures to the Midwest this week, but the reason behind the phenomenon, in part, boils down to heat. The polar vortex is an area of cold, low-pressure air that swirls over the Earth's poles year-round, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The polar vortex surrounding the North Pole swirls counterclockwise and sits above the jet stream, a strong, fast current of wind that separates the colder air in the north from the warmer air in the south. When the polar vortex and the jet stream are strong, the cold Arctic air tends to stay close to the pole. In the northern hemisphere's winter months, however, the polar vortex expands and becomes less stable. Around January 2nd, part of the stratosphere had a rapid rise in temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit in just a few days. That's according to NOAA. The process split the unstable polar vortex. When part of the vortex broke off, pockets of Arctic air moved south, causing the current cold snap, meteorologists say. Some climate scientists believe that Arctic warming due to climate change may be destabilizing the polar vortex, according to a 2017 study in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, creating more extreme weather. Cold temperature extremes, however, have become less severe and less frequent overall in recent decades, while extreme heat events are now more severe and more frequent. And this article was by Brianna Abbott. I wanted to share that science with you because if you were ever able, and I hope that you all will be able to go to Arizona, it's southern Arizona near Tucson, and visit the Biosphere 2, all of this can be discovered and gone. You can look in depth at it because what they have done with the biosphere is the basis of what they're doing to allow people to survive and thrive as we look at living on Mars. They have this wonderful electronic globe that you can choose atmosphere changes, you can choose sea level rise changes from 1 meter, 2 meters, up to 8 meters, and you can see the globe and you can see the areas of change. So it's a very experiential, visual, audio experience of current science and looking at how what's happening today can be happening in the future. Really, everyone, there's not a lot to be afraid of, but if we don't deal with the changes, it could be scary. So the top issues that I'm always teaching people about, students in school about, teachers who want to integrate STEM, is looking at the future of food, which aquaponics is something that we know goes back to indigenous wisdom. Aquaponics is when you use water that have fish in it, and then you have the plants. So what happens is the fish, when they do their business, right, there's a lot of nitrogen in that. So the water from that flows down, and there's no soil. There can be rocks, there can be gravel. Sometimes it's free hanging, depending on how you've got your aquaponics set up. But that water with the nutrients and the nitrates from the fish excrement really allows for rapid growth, and then it's a closed cycle. So the water goes from the plants back up around. The plants actually, when you have plants, part of when they grow is they pull nutrients, right? So they're actually cleaning the water by pulling what they need out of the water, and then it recycles itself around. We'll go more in depth about aquaponics in our next episode, but stay tuned and think about the future of food and ocean acidification. You make a difference when you simply don't waste food. Here's a little fact. If you do not waste food, if a family of 4 did not waste food for a week, either they just reduced it, just was not wasting food. There's nothing that's going in the rubbish. If you did that for a week, you'd be saving the amount of damage that would be comparable to not driving 2 cars for that family for 6 weeks. So methane gas, we've mentioned this in previous episodes. Methane gas is what is created when food is rotting. And it goes up like a free radical, like when a single cell, like wild organism gas into the atmosphere. When you compost it, right, it is able to bind. So you've got 2, I don't know if it's a molecule or what it is, but you've got 2 together and it contains it. And then the methane is used in a useful way. And that is why composting and worm composting in schools is very, very popular. That all has to do with the future of food. So think about that. And next, we're going to hear about Lindsay Vogt. Stay tuned.